Good morning, or should we say good afternoon. I am David Osimo from the Lisbon Council. I'm here to chair and introduce the webinar on how the power of data can drive the European Union economy. This is our second webinar of the new cycle. The first webinar was in November, and it was about how the public sector, how government can leverage private data. This webinar is part of a large case study for the European Commission, where IDC and the Lisbon Council are measuring the European data economy. They are also providing insight into the necessary policy options and into the specific impact that the data economy is having in specific sector, in specific areas. We've been working together. This second cycle has started in January 2017, but we've been working together for a long time on this topic, actually since 2014, where we were in charge of the first version of the EU data market study. I'm saying this because it is quite clear today that the data economy is here to stay. We've been working on this for a long time, and it is clear that this is not a hype. It is clear that it is affecting not only the technology scene, but every sector of the economy. So what we're going to talk today is the first release of the main report of this study. This is the main report which illustrates the key performance indicator of the European data economy and understand the growth tendencies year on year in order to monitor the development of what is considered a fundamental factor of European competitiveness. Now, we are not only producing numbers here, we are also producing ideas on possible scenarios for the future and how policies and different policies can have an impact on that. So as you understand, this is a very broad research agenda. We are issuing stories periodically. We are producing webinars to illustrate our findings and to discuss with the community. And this is what this webinar is about. It's about sharing the results that we have produced so far and hearing from you about comments, questions, and ideas. So this is how the webinar is going to be structured. Basically, fundamentally, we are going to divide it into three moments. The first part, Giorgio Micheletti of IDC will illustrate the key performance indicator, the key data of the European data economy. In the second part, Gabriella Cattane will illustrate the different growth scenario and how different policy options can help with that. And in the last part, TNO will illustrate, Dirk Tiemann from TNO will illustrate his point of view as an expert, as a discussant of the finding that we present, and how some European projects are helping to address the fundamental issues that underlie the European data economy. We'll also have some time for question and answers. As I said, feel free to post the question using the specific feature on this software. There is a question button that you can click, and you can submit your questions, and we will circulate the question to the appropriate speaker. You can issue the question anytime during you don't have to wait for the end, but we will address them at the end. If we have time, we will also give the floor to some of you who have a specific idea to contribute. Now, it's a very tight agenda. I've started on time. Normally, we give a bit of a cushion for latecomers, but in view of the rich content that we have today, I prefer to start on time. It is now 8:35, and I think I can finish my introduction and pass the floor to Giorgio Micheletti of IDC, who will illustrate the main findings of the first report of the European data economy. Now, before Giorgio speaks, let me just give a few points of order. As I said, this is a webinar where at the end the question and points will be taken from the audience. The recording of the webinar will be published online on our website, Data Landscape, excuse me, datalandscape.eu. Also, the interim report, the results, the data that we are presenting here today are, as I said, contained in the first report. This report will be published on the same website, and you can download the report immediately at the end, after the end of the webinar. So datalandscape.eu is where you can find all the necessary information, not only much more data, but also the explanation of the methodology behind the data and the insight. So I see that already questions are starting to come. This is great. I would like to now give the floor to Giorgio Micheletti for your introduction about the key data on the European data economy. Giorgio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. This is Giorgio Micheletti from IDC, and as David said, I'm going to present some of the key indicators or the key findings from this first round of measurements of the renewal of this project. As David correctly said, this is a prolonged endeavor that we started together in 2013, 2014, and to give you an idea of the level of visibility that this has reached over the years, most of these numbers have been, I would say, repeatedly quoted by the European Commissions and by other policymakers in some of the most important policy documents over the past few years. Some of these numbers were already quoted, for example, in May 2015, when the digital single market for Europe was launched. Again, they were repeated when the Commission launched the Digitizing European Industry initiative, and also, of course, in the most recent communications of January 2017, when the Commission launched the Building of the European Data Economy initiative. So, without further ado, I'm going to present you the structure of the key indicators that were produced in this second release. We covered both the supply and demand of the so-called data market and the data economy. Namely, we apprehended the market both from the demand side, so from the user's perspective, but also from the supply perspectives. So the companies who are actually producing data-driven products and services that are exchanged in this market. We also produced numbers that were not confined to the present, so to the current reality, 2016 and 2017, but we developed, as in the previous version, we developed 3 alternative scenarios to apprehend how this market can evolve and the different paths of evolution of this market according to 3 different scenarios up to the year 2025. And then what you see in the middle here is the actual core of the structures of the indicators. This can be seen along, I would say, 4 main areas. You can see that on the left-hand side, there is the workers or data professionals areas where we apprehended the number of people actually active in this market, but also the gap that is emerging in terms of skills when dealing with data-driven technologies. Then we had another area that covered the companies, as I said, so both the suppliers and the users of data-driven products and services. So the the products that are part and parcel of this market. And then the other areas was the data market itself, so the actual value of this market and the effects that this market has on the overall economy. Mainly the data economy, the cylinder that you see on the right-hand side and the bottom of this slide. David correctly mentioned of the data, because we finished the first round of measurements, so we can present some of the data associated with this structure that you see here. This is just a general review. Don't forget that for each of this indicator, there are in fact a series of sub-indicators. So each indicator is composed in different additional measurements. But if you look at the pictures here, we can see that when it comes to the actual workers, so the number of professionals actively involved in this data market, we are in the range of 6.7 million for the year 2017, and this is an indicator, as for most of the other indicators, that is constantly on the increase. If we look at the measurements that we carried out from 2014 onwards. Another important element is, of course, the actual size of the market itself. Here we're talking billions of euros, and we are in the range of 50-something billion of euros. And again, this has been improved considerably from our initial measurements of 2013 and 2014. This has immediate repercussions on the overall economy. So if we look at the data economy on the bottom right-hand side of the image here, we can see that when we talk economy, clearly we have to multiply this data by a considerable multiplier. So we're talking 335 billion at least for the year 2017, and then my colleague Gabriella will cover the evolution of these data in the next few years up to the year 2025. When looking at the data companies, we measured not only the actual numbers of the units of companies involved in the supply, but also in the demand of data-driven products and services. But we also measured their revenues, so the revenues associated and generated by these companies, and you can see the key numbers for the year 2017 here in this slide. Now, all this exercise was actually, I would say, very well summarized graphically in the monitoring tool that the Lisbon Council helped in putting together and presenting. So we created a interactive tool where all of these different indicators can be accessed and seen in a, I would say, in a dynamic way. So I'm trying to show you how it actually works. I hope everybody can see the actual tool. Just a few moments. So you can see that we have here the possibility of looking at the indicators along two main lines, by member states, but also by industries. If we look at the member states, we are given the chance to look at the EU map, and by moving the cursor on each of the single member states, we can have an immediate snapshot of the value of the indicators, and we can choose the indicators on the drop-down menu that you can find here. On the right-hand side, we have, I hope I can show you this, but on the right-hand side, we have the list of the key indicators. And sorry, just 1 second. Yeah, thank you. Of the key indicators. These are, again, this is a excerpt of the whole indicators that we produce in this report. We chose the most important one, but the key features that I wanted to show you is that we can actually open the table and look at the whole year's evolution of the. We can also have nice representations of graphic representations of the evolutions of these indicators over the years and in the near future up to the year 2025, according to the three scenarios that we have developed. So back to the slides. I think it's yeah. So back to the slides. I wanted also to spend a few words on the data-driven organization and on the fact that, as I said before, we spend a lot of resources in identifying and measuring the actual phenomenon of the data users in our study. We did this before, but in this specific edition, we actually provided more insights. And when we look at the data-driven organizations, we're looking at what the data are actually doing when discussing the digital transformation process. So in other words, what this slide wants to convey is that the data centricity in today's organization, data are really at the core of not only the classic technologies that we were discussing until a few years ago, but the data are dominating the processes, namely the operations and the productions, for example, in European organizations and also worldwide, but they also at the core of the governance processes of an entire organization. So the old business intelligence and the strategic knowledge and of the organizations is driven by data, and data are clearly affecting the HR processes and the need of acquiring talent. So we discussed one indicator that we measured this year and also in the previous years was the so-called data skills gaps. We need to carefully consider this because talent is one of the elements at the core of the data-driven organization. So, namely, the data users that we apprehend in this studies. And again, a few examples. We discussed the generic structure, or what is the generic meaning of the data users organization. We can see some numbers here of data-driven companies. We measured the numbers, as I said, it's the units, but we also measured the penetration of these data users, or at least the way we defined these data users, and we measured in terms of penetration as a percentage of the total companies in the EU 28, so across the member states of the European Union. In this case, we are talking 6.8%. It may seem a rather limited percentage, but in reality, it's a penetration rate that has been constantly increasing over the past few years, and certainly over the year 2013 when we started this round of measurements. If we're looking at the use cases, we also have additional research from IDC, for example. Excuse me. So there is also the use cases I wanted to say. So before actually giving you some examples of these companies, I wanted to highlight some of the areas where data are most fruitfully used by organizations in Europe. And according to parallel research for IDC, we identified at least 3 sectors that are particularly intensively using data, which are financial services, manufacturing, and the public sectors. And for each of these vertical markets, you can see that there are some specific use cases that are particularly relevant. In the case of financial services, the risk analysis and the understanding of the exposure of companies for financial risk is one cases, but also the fraud detection and the pretensions, but also the profiling and analysis of customers, for example. In the manufacturing, it's all about the digital factory and the factory of the future. So it's not only limited to the improvement of the production processes and the operations, but also it's about supporting innovative products and also analyzing machines and devising and the data coming out from the machines. So to, for example, anticipate when maintenance has to be performed or when machinery has to be changed, for example. The public sector is another area where data are constantly and more importantly used. This is used to personalize the citizen services, but also to increase the overall efficiency for services to the different citizens. But also an interesting case in point, for example, is to prevent and respond to natural disasters becoming important, and mastering and gathering data and analyzing the data is becoming an important resource also to counteract this specific challenge. In this other slides, I wanted to show you a couple of examples, but I'm going to quickly, essentially, there were, if I was talking about generic use cases in the slide before here, I wanted to give you some real-life examples with 3 different companies, one in the automotive sector, the other one in the insurance, the other one in retail. I think you all know these companies, and again, data are becoming more and more important to produce innovations and improve internal and external processes here. So what to do? The message that I want to give here is that precisely for companies, data cannot be ignored anymore. So the first difficulty that we see, this is a next step, an immediate next step is to better understand on which data companies are actually sitting on. So this is something that companies sometimes don't understand, or they don't even know. We all have data, we all produce data, and with these technologies we are producing even more and more data. So the first thing to take care of is to know the asset of data that we have, and in order to start new business models and revenues that derived from these data. The second one is a classic observation. So if we want to make the most from our data, if companies want to make the most from their data, they have to break the silos and work combining and integrating the data that the different departments of the companies are producing. The third element is to look for the upcoming and the already there, but the upcoming additional and innovative technologies like artificial intelligence or IoT. These are technologies that are not only producing a vast amount of data, but they are producing data flows that are, I would say, more and more regular, and that are not longer producing data at regular intervals, but they are producing regular in a continuous stream. So this is something that is posing additional challenges and has to be considered, significantly considered. And then look at the GDPR, so the General Direct Data Protection Regulation is coming into force at the end of next month, the 25th of May. Certainly for some, this is seen as a bureaucratic burden. It is in a sense, but it's also a very big opportunity because it precisely allows companies to look at the points that I mentioned before, and it gives the, I would say, the right motivation also to look at and to take actions when it comes to data. Now, with these words, the overarching idea that behind this is that the data revolution is there and is an extraordinary opportunity. Certainly, companies and organizations alike cannot miss it. And I give now the floor to Gabriella, who will expand and explain why companies and organizations cannot miss this specific opportunity. Gabriella.
Thank you. Unless you want to ask some questions, or shall we continue? Yes, the data-driven revolution is an opportunity for enterprises, but also produces a lot of benefits for the general economy, for the society, and hopefully for all of us. But there are many uncertainties yet on how this is going to evolve. So what we are presenting now is what is the near future, what's going to happen. And the first point is where we are going. We have developed 3 alternative scenarios, which are based on the potential key turning points of the evolution of the data market. And we see in all scenarios a very strong growth rate. So we estimate that the data market will grow from 50 billion euros in 2017 to 60 in 2020. And should double in the best possible scenario, Datadriven Reality, high growth scenario, up to 110 billion euros. But even in the baseline scenario, which is a more mixed perspective scenario based on the evolution of current trends, we expect it to go up to 85 billion. And in the scenario less positive, the digital maze, it will grow to 74 billion. So the main issue here is why and how. How does the data market and data economy evolve, and what are the key points? We have focused this year, based also on recent events, on 2 main, what we call focal issues, which are axes outlining 2 polar opposites, that is 2 different potential ways in which the economy and the society could evolve. So in the vertical axis, you see the assumptions about the data market. So the question here is, how fast will data-driven innovation grow in Europe? So by looking at the main drivers and barriers of data market growth, we have positioned these scenarios along this axis between low and high diffusion of data innovation, which is the pace of growth. But the horizontal axis is even more interesting, I think. It's about what we call data governance. The main question is, who will have power on data, and what will governments do about it? Now, this is something which includes a number of issues which are arising exactly because data infrastructures and data assets are becoming widespread, and sharing and exploiting them is becoming more and more frequent. So we are looking at the social control of data, so in which way, whether individuals will actually be able to maintain control of data, of their personal data, what is the basic principle of GDPR, in fact, which is based on the concept that individuals must have control of their data and can control it and change it and must be informed if it is used. But we know very well with the most recent scandals like Cambridge Analytica and Facebook that this is also something which is currently very much out of our control. On the other hand, we have all the business issues about the relationship between online data platforms and businesses. And from that point of view, for example, the European Commission has carried out an analysis and has a proposal regulation about defining a fair playing issue, because at the moment, the control of data is concentrated in a few dominant platforms, and many businesses, from hotels to all kinds of to newspapers, are actually have very little power in front of platforms like Google, who can decide whether or not their businesses will be seen, sold, distributed, and so on. So we looked at this in the perspective of the next 8-9 years, and we think these are hot issues which will become even more and more important. And we may go into different directions, whether this kind of data control will remain concentrated in a few actors, business or governments controlling everything about data, or whether we will go towards an open model with more distributed and shared data, with sufficient transparency to allow both individuals, small businesses, and social actors to have a say in how data is used. We believe that a concentrated scenario tends to reduce the exploitation and the enjoyment of the benefits of data innovation tends to concentrate these benefits more, especially in the actors who dominate data. On the other hand, a distributed model of social control of data will allow more distributed benefits and, if you want, less injustice. So these are the two axes of the scenarios, and as you can see, in our assumptions, we see the baseline scenario as a little bit in between, so with moving towards distributed data control in terms of having some guarantees and some transparency, but not all of it. While in the high growth scenario, data-driven reality, we see a full data ecosystem with a lot of transparency and individual control. On the other hand, we see in the challenge scenario not only some negative economic drivers like lower global growth, but also some problematic ways to control data, which may also result in less trust and confidence in data innovation and lower diffusion of data innovation because of the lack of transparency. So in this context, what does it mean in terms of money? There are very sensible differences. In the baseline scenario, we see the data economy to grow to more than 540 billion euros, representing up to 4% of the European GDP, which is already quite a lot. If you look at the high growth scenario, this could be as high as over 700 billion euros and go up to 5.4% of the EU GDP. So you can see that the benefit of a more open and distributed ecosystem will be really sensible. And finally, in the challenge scenario, we can see that the size of the benefits are about half of the high growth scenario, and the share of GDP will be 2.9%, so a much lower share of wealth. Oops. A very important concept here is that the data market, all the money spent in the data market has a multiplier impact on the data economy. By data market, we mean the market where you sell and buy data technologies and data products and services. The data economy includes all the benefits and resulting, for example, revenue growth and social benefits which result from the use of data technologies. According to our estimates, the data market, data innovation has a multiplier. So every euro spent in the data market generates between 4 to 6 euros, depending on the scenarios, as we have seen in the data economy. And this multiplier impact is the reason why the data economy is so important and is considered a way to boost growth in Europe and maintain dynamism. But why policy matters? We have examined a number of factors. To go towards one or the other scenario, the worst or the best scenario, there are a number of driving factors which have to do with private initiatives, for example, investments, as well as in external events from Europe. For example, there could be a global crisis. Just imagine North Korea or a trade war between China and the US. These factors are not under the control of Europe, but there are also a number of factors which have to do with policy control and policy matters. So what are the factors which may help to lead to the best scenario rather than the worst scenario? According to our analysis, the baseline scenario is a scenario where we focus on exploiting data. The data industry, which is the data supplier companies, are driving exploitation. We see a scenario where both the global data protection regulation and the digital single market are implemented, but there are some gaps, some delays, with the richer regions and the richer companies having an advantage. We see a gradual development of standards, a positive development of open data, increase in trust and confidence, but not yet the full benefit which will come from the data-driven reality. In this scenario, we see the benefits of a fully developed data ecosystem. We see a digital single market which is actually fully implemented as the global data protection regulation succeeds in harmonizing regulation and also building trust and confidence. Very important, the European Union leads new global antitrust policies restraining dominant platforms and in general pushing for principles of transparency and guarantees for both individuals and all businesses. The ICT standardization plan is fully implemented. There is a high diffusion of trusted data platforms which provide secure environments for data sharing and data trading. So the difference between the data-driven reality and exploiting data innovation, the high growth and the baseline, is mainly the data ecosystem and the ability to push to its maximum benefits the data sharing and data trading environment, including, for example, data flows across Europe. By the way, Brexit, one of the issues which Brexit will create is what to do with the data flows between the UK and Europe. This is another area which will require negotiation, and believe me, it's definitely not been even looked at yet, even if there is a report by the UK government which is considering it. But there will be the need of some kind of special arrangement like we do with the US if we want to keep crossing and sharing data with the UK. Finally, what could happen in the challenge scenario? In this scenario, digital innovation remains trapped by a series of digital barriers in a digital maze. It's a scenario of fragmented markets, incomplete digital single markets, slow GDPR. It's simply that all these policies do not become successful because they're not fully implemented, and this creates lack of trust and slower innovation in a context of lower global growth and lower investments. The failure of open standards and lack of interoperability, of course, complement this kind of scenario. So again, this is a digital barrier scenario, and this is why we see a lower growth here, even if the push of innovation is so strong that this continues. So I think this is mainly what I wanted to say in terms of what could be the assumptions and hypotheses we see in the near future. And I look very much towards our other co-speaker, Tjerk, what he will say about this scenario.
Thank you very much, Gabriella. Welcome, Tjerk. Before we move to Tjerk, I would like to start answering the question that you have started to send. We do have one question for Giorgio that maybe you can address quickly now, because we have little time, not because it's not important. If you can give more information about the data worker skills gap, you pointed at it, but it's obviously a fundamental issue. That can you clarify a bit?
Yeah. So in a few words, and then Gabriella can correct me. I think the data skills gap is essentially the gap between the demand and supply of data professionals. So the supply of data professionals is the supplies of and the whole stock of the data skills available in a specific market. In other words, it's the sum of those who are employed and those who are unemployed with data skills. And the demand of the data skills professionals is those who have the actual data workers as measured by our indicators, but plus the vacancies, so plus the unfulfilled vacancies of necessary data workers required by the market. Now, if the demand, as in this case, appears to be higher than the supplies, then we have a data skills gap.
Yeah. The trend that we see is that the demand grows faster than supply. So the education system and the training system are gearing towards producing more data skills, but the demand is faster than supply in all scenarios, with a strong gap in the data-driven reality.
Thank you very much. Tjerk, I hope you can hear us, and if you want to try to speak, I think I have muted all my mics, so I will now unmute you, and can you try to speak, to check the audio?
Yes, hi. I hope you can hear.
I'll give you the floor if that's okay with you, so you can manage the slide directly. Is that okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, now you are a presenter, and if you click on the little screen icon, perfect, you know how to do that. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. I will continue on the point made by Gabriella on the scenarios, which are very interesting in that it shows that in any case, even in the worst case scenario, there are more policy questions, but the question of data being having a pivotal role is unambiguous. I will quickly go through a kind of micro study on as to counter these large numbers, what we try to do in the context of the Big Data Value Project, where we as TNO are also a part of. We try to look at what is actually happening on the ground in startups, in SMEs, what kind of data-driven innovations are there, and how is that market moving within the ICT sector itself, but also cross-sectoral. And that is to give a bit of body and flesh to such numbers. Also because, and this was mentioned before already, but is often not enough yet on the map or the radar of startups and SMEs, is the role of the ecosystem, data-driven ecosystem in general, and the role of framework conditions and regulation as well, often because of a lack of expertise, a lack of knowledge, lack of manpower to deal with this. And yet, as already pointed out, in the choice of these scenarios and the type of data world we want to create from Europe as a leading position, these are crucial steps. I don't have to remind anyone of the GDPR coming up, but we also have a single digital gateway regulation coming up. There's also a proposal to deal with non-personal data within Europe. So we are moving on the policy side, but we need to see how that affects the actual data innovation on the ground. What we focused on is kind of what kind of business modeling is going on there. I won't go too deep into that. But what we try to develop is a new method that goes beyond the traditional business canvas that only looks at, I have a certain idea as a startup, and I will look at how I make money and then go for it, and rather to explore and bring that a step further to say we need a data-driven business modeling canvas that startups and SMEs can use to take framework conditions and to take the data ecosystem into account. This I'll go very quickly through. The BDVE is a support action for the Big Data Value Association, where a lot of data-driven
Hello, we seem to have a problem with the audio. Suddenly, the audio of Tjerk has disappeared. Tjerk, if you hear us, I think you have a problem with the microphone.
Marketing and framework conditions.
Tjerk, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, your audio went away for 30 seconds.
Oh, my apologies. I don't.
If you can just repeat the last 30 seconds.
Yes, apologies for that. I am well connected, so I don't know what happened there. In any case, I can skip through this. The point is we look at the impact of framework conditions and marketplaces and business modeling. Regarding the latter, the marketplaces, we talked about it before in this session. What is interesting that in Europe now we are also having quite some successful startups that look at actual data marketplaces. So not data technologies and skills, but actually buying and selling and matchmaking data sets between companies. And this is a very physical and literal data market that is very interesting, I find, to see also what the value of data actually is. That in the end will be dependent on what the market thinks something is worth. As I said before, we want to better address data-driven innovation. I will quickly, also due to time, not stop too long here, but this is a former model that already has been developed a step further. But what we said is very important in also trying to understand the micro world of data-driven innovation. You need to, as a startup or SME, think about the supply side, the offering, and the demand side, so the context. And especially all the business canvases that come from normal startups and went to data-driven startups only look at the blue side, so at the offering, where they often think they have a specific technology, they have maybe one or two partners or not yet, and have a certain value proposition around data, either in the generation of data, the processing, or the usage. But what often is forgotten in really thinking long-term how you can have a successful data-driven startup is to take into account the ecosystem. So what is happening in terms of standards, moving targets, platforms, where do we have to be in terms of value network strategy. So we might start up with one particular service, but after a year or two, it might have to develop into, I don't know, more AI-driven services or more being on the supply side or demand side. So we see that with successful startups, they have a value network strategy over time. So they don't have one value proposition, but they anticipate how the data market changes over time. And last but not least, also framework conditions that besides the GDPR and dealing with personal data, also simply thinking about the earlier mentioned transparency. What do I do with requests from users? How do I manage my data internally? Who can access specific sensitive data? Where do I store it? Often this is not directly on the mind of startups and SMEs. And in order to create this transparent European data market, I think this should be far more emphasized. And we try to do this via this this new model that we try to test and see with startups if they see also the same added value that we see. So what we learned, learning from the ecosystem, so to look at startups, to capture the real-time ideas of what is happening there. We see that there is a lot of focus on matchmaking between data supply and demand. We see the data markets in the EU are real and developing fast. And an interesting step there is that not only do we see an actual trading in data, we also see upcoming an actual trade in algorithms. So one paradigm can be that you don't ship or sell data at all, but that you keep it in-house and that you ship and sell the algorithm or the smartness between the data. And we see an actual market for that developing as well. So who can sell smart AIs for particular services. So also we see startups moving not only thinking data-driven, but maybe algorithmic-driven innovation in that regard. What we also see, but this is still in study, so we cannot say this yet with 100% certainty, but we see that a lot of startups are still agnostic towards sector-specific opportunities. So they think as long as I am a good data cruncher, data scientist, I can tackle any kind of sector. And this is absolutely not true, especially if you look at the ecosystem, frame conditions, specific regulations for specific sectors. There needs to be increased awareness that specific sectors have particular cultures and particular regulations that you can do and do not, certain things you can do and certain things you cannot do within this market. And that could be a very big step forwards as well to creating actual value instead of saying I can crunch some numbers for you. We use this demo hacks to validate value propositions, and the idea is to connect data-driven innovation startups to investor schemes a bit better than what's happening now. Some challenges we see, as we discussed before, strategy is too often too short-term or on one idea. There's some kind of naivety regarding competition and difficulty of such markets. Often there's the lacking of technical skills or the right partners. So some things you as a startup and in this data-driven innovation world, you can and want to do yourself. And some you should really early on realize this is not my turf. I should partner up smartly with somebody who provides the data or who can do the regulation or who has a customer base already. And often startups want to do too many things themselves. And as said before, there's often a blind eye to developments within the data ecosystem. So we need to develop tools to help startups with that. This I will skip through because this is really project related, but to go back to the scenarios and the role of regulation, which is rightly pointed out by Gabriella, that we have choices within Europe there as to these directions of these scenarios. What I have been writing about myself and many others is the role and remaining the meaning of data, and this remains unclear. Of course, we said in the GDPR that there's something like personal data, but this notion is so broad that potentially too many things will fall under that, and therefore it will become a renderless, useless kind of a tool. But on the other hand, it might offer opportunities to create some specific safeguarding and some specific directions. And this is not a fault of the GDPR or any other regulation, but it's a fault of the fact that we still don't know what this data thing really is. And if you really look at it from a technical or information systems perspective, you get very different results than if you look from a policy perspective, social perspective, or a philosophical perspective even. So I'm not saying that we have to have a clear definition, but it would be good to invest some time in thinking about what kind of role and meaning data actually has before we a priori think what it is. The regulation is there, of course, to shape the supply and demand world within Europe and out there. Now, as I mentioned before, we have one big problem in Europe is data localization issues. There is a single digital gateway regulation that does something with that, only on the administrative side, but this is still a hurdle for many companies to venture abroad within Europe and member states to start sharing data. Also, what we underestimate, have maybe underestimated, what was mentioned before, is the power of data in the public sphere. So it's not innocent to have a Google page or to let Facebook take over a public service. It sounds all cool and nice, and of course they want to help, but somehow there's a notion or a need to think about what is private data and what is public data, and how do we protect that. How can we think about these spheres in a digital kind of manner, and what then is the real risk? I would argue that the real risk is not so much as in the data as in the algorithms and the algorithmic transparency that should be behind it, which is not an easy topic, but it's something we should, as Europe, also have a strong policy on. I think what we also try to do ourselves as TNO is to, together with a lot of partners, is think about data-driven policy making and policy labs. So to think the other way around, okay, if there is public data to be used for the good, and not only for consumer or marketing driven purposes, but also to find this level of transparency and using certain data for certain means, then how can you actually use data science methods to improve also and to learn on a policy cycle. As mentioned before, another point is that scholarship around data is definitely not new. The digital humanities have been saying a lot about it. System theory has been saying a lot about it. Computer science has been saying a lot about it. But in a way, this plurality is a good thing. But sometimes, especially from the market-driven perspective and the startup perspective, it's sometimes good to go back to such notions and see what data kind of is or does in particular context. The problem now of scraping a social media platform is that you decontextualize data, you see it as objective numbers, you do some analysis on it, and then a conclusion rolls out that is often completely out of scope or out of context of how and where the data was actually generated. And last but not least, one way that's also presented here is to map out kind of scenarios to see what we can and should do there. Recently, I think was today or yesterday in the news, there's Alice initiative from Europe, which is a very good idea, I think, to have a center of AI to also have our own idea and meaning on it, because data and artificial intelligence are intrinsically linked, and I think again that a lot of issues also in this scenarios that were sketched before, from a not so easy development to full potential of this market, will lie in the combination of having the right data, but also having the right ideas in terms of artificial intelligence, what we want to do with it, but also what we not want to do with it. That was very dense, I know, and apologies for that, but we can have some questions on specific regulations, but for now this is a short overview that I wanted to give. And the main message is that we should not only look large scale, but policy should also learn from on the ground startups to see how that European market is moving and what is actually the data-driven innovation that is happening there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dirk. This was really interesting. And I would like to now leave the floor to to those of you who are interested. We have received already some questions. I'm not sure we can answer all of them, but let's start. Anna Flavia Bianchi asked about the scenarios to Gabriella. Do you consider the role of EU in the global scene, and does this depend from policy regulation or from other factors? The scenario are influenced, to what extent do they depend on policies and on other global scenarios? Sorry.
Well said. Well said. Of course, I have shown the policy assumptions, but our scenarios actually have four main areas of assumptions. So one is about the market, one is about global trends, one is about the economy. So of course it's not only policy. I do believe that the European Union is in a position to influence the debate and the evolution of the global let's say regulatory and I would say also reflection on how to deal with data platforms because of the GDPR. So Europe is where we have started first to think about privacy, and we have never wavered in our defense of the principle of the individual control and autonomy. So I think this is very important, and is also the country where, for example, Booking.com was sued by antitrust authorities in every country in defense of small hotels and so on. So I think in our Europe can provide a starting point for a number of discussions and reflections. I do agree with Tjerk as well that algorithm transparency is very important, and it's both technical and social in terms of how this kind of new tools are used. So I will say that it's not only policy that influences these scenarios, and we are still very much reflecting and asking for feedback on how to evolve them. So these are not the last word. These are scenarios to 2025, so there are many uncertainties around them. So please consider them as hypotheses, let's say, of scenarios from what we see as the strongest trends. I hope this answered the question.
Yes, thanks. There is another question from for Tjerk. About SMEs. You seem to focus a lot on SMEs in your presentation. Is it because there is no problem with large companies, or is it just because the focus of your research is on that?
Thank you. That's a very relevant question. Of course, there are some practical sides to that and some research interest sides. Whereas large companies definitely have a role to play, as we have seen in the recent years when it comes to the role of data in society. First of all, it's a bit beyond the scope to actually inquire well into large companies, because they not so easy and willing always to show what is behind. And there's systems in place for that, transparency reports, certain policies. What we were really interested in this study is to see from the ground up where innovation really comes from. And often large companies do have, of course, their eyes also on data-driven innovation, but often they do not show the same speed or agility or creativity that small companies and SMEs have in really trying to explore and find new ways or routes to develop this. What you do see, of course, is that large companies have these systems in place that they say, okay, we can have startups under our wing, or we can have a kind of separate department that we say, okay, go and play around with this. Still, it's and of course these are equally interesting and important. What was for us relevant is to see the other side, really from the also from a European perspective. It's really the SMEs that make a large part of the economy and very important. and we thought it's really relevant for them to see if they make this transition towards the data-driven innovation and don't miss the bus, as the picture was shown in Giorgio's presentation. The large companies will have, they will be already on this bus, highly likely. But it's more interesting to see how, if sector specifics, SMEs or small medium enterprises, if they want to and can and understand what happens to them if data moves towards the center of all their activities. And I think there's a lot to gain there in terms of learning what kind of problems they face, but also what the opportunities are. I hope that answers a bit your question. But the point is, do lead.
Yes, thank you very much. It is now 3:30. We are exactly on time to close this webinar. So since I am Italian, I will talk a little bit so we can break the rules and go beyond. Thank you very much to all of you for attending. As you can see, you can find more information on our website and in our forthcoming webinars. I would just like to point out that I enjoyed a lot of the webinar, and it is interesting what Tjerk said about the marketplace, and it is counterintuitive. It runs against our findings. In the previous reports, we have seen really data marketplaces struggling. So I really look forward to reading a bit of your work to understand how and which marketplace are really gaining ground. This is just to show that any such webinar is just the beginning of a conversation. So I hope to keep in touch with all of you. You can contact us, go on our website, and participate to the next webinars. Thank you very much for your attendance, and goodbye.